My name's Martin Hinchelwood, and I created the Azure DevOps migration tools. You can find them on the Visual Studio Marketplace. If you search under Azure DevOps, you will find the tools. We're actually up to about 50,000 migrations, just over 50,000 migrations, migration sessions per month. In the last 30 days, we've migrated 340,000 work items with 2.6 million revisions using the tool. So that's pretty huge. I do want to stress the warning that you can see here on the page. The tool is not designed for novices. It is developed by and for Azure DevOps consultants who have helped lots of folks do migrations around the world. You're welcome to have a go. This video is going to try and explain how to get started with the tool. We've updated it a lot in the last year, in fact 2 years since the last video. We've merged a lot of the different tools together, as well as enabled syncing for work item migrations. So if you do a migration and then somebody happens to have changed a bunch of work items in the old system between you starting the migration and it finishing, you can have it go and pull those additional changes across as well. So it's kind of pseudo syncing. It's not syncing between two systems, but syncing from one system to the other system. I get a lot of questions around what versions of Azure DevOps does it support. Everything that the object model API does, so that's TFS 2013 plus. It does mostly work against older versions of TFS, but the official support is TFS 2013 and onwards all the way up through Azure DevOps. And yes, you can go from Azure DevOps to Azure DevOps, Azure DevOps to TFS, TFS to Azure DevOps, pretty much whatever you want. Let me pop over. There's a documentation available on GitHub. It has a lot more detail on how the tool works. So if you click through to the documentation, you will go to this page. And on here, you'll see detailed documentation about what the processors that are available are. And the processors are the thing that does the work. So the node structures migration processor will move your areas and iterations across. The work item migration context will migrate your work items, links, revisions, attachments, and hopefully, if we can get it organized, it's not working right now, the HTML field embedded images as well, and it will also fix the Git commits. There's a number of other tools that are available. Work item delete. This is deliberately crippled so that you don't accidentally delete a whole bunch of stuff. You will need the code to be able to run this one, but you can delete any number of work items. An updater. So instead of migration from one system to another, if you just want to run a bunch of changes against an existing project, then you can do that. So for example, you might have added a new field and you want to migrate data from one field to another field, or you might want to split data from one field into two fields. So that work item update will allow you to run against an existing project. Work item query migrator will obviously migrate your queries across. So it will take them, just need to make sure that it will skip any queries where the fields don't match up. So you need to be aware of that the fields in the new location need to match the fields in the old location, otherwise it would error out. There is also a migrator for the teams. I think it's actually not on this list yet, but it will migrate create teams and migrate all of the settings for those teams across, or as much as possible at the moment. There are a bunch of tools around migrating test cases, and so suites and plans. You have to migrate the variables first, then the configurations, and then you run a plans and suites migration, which will pull that across. So you do not migrate test cases using this tool. You have to use the work item migration context to migrate the test cases, but do not migrate the test plans and test suites work items across at the same time. Otherwise, you'll end up with a bunch of duplicate items. That's about it for the general processors. We have a number of field maps. I did mention that if you're either working against a single team project or you're migrating from one to another, you may want to use some field maps. This is good if your source and target projects have different processes. You might want to use this. Or if you're updating, changing the process on an existing project and you want to map data from one field to another. So there's just a field to field map, field to field multi-map. So that's a list. If you've got a field with a list in it, it will map the data from one to another. Field merge, put two fields together in a particular format. Blanket, so you don't want to migrate a particular field. Field to tag, so you can convert any number of fields from your source system to tags in your target system. That's good for a bunch of fields that are not available in the target system. You don't want to add them to the target system. For example, if you're simplifying a process, you can run the field to tag to save some of that data while not adding to the load of number of fields. Field value map, so that's just a value mapper, and then we've got field value to tag. So if there's a set of values, you can map them to tags. A regex field mapper, so that's pretty useful. For example, I built this for a customer who had their version format in 2016.2 in a text field, and they wanted to set it in a drop-down list, one with 2016 and the other one with the 2. So the regex field map will let you do that. And then for many organizations that have been in TFS for a long time, they have a problem where all of their area paths, their area tree hierarchy is reflective of their product or organizational hierarchy rather than the team's hierarchy, which is how the new system prefers things to work. You don't have to do it that way, prefers things to work. So if you want to map all of that tree into tags, so it'll take each node and build a tag and attach it to the work items, you can do that. So it'll map area path to tags. So if you had an area path that was 7 deep, you would end up with 7 tags, one for each of the things. Just allows you a way to categorize that and save that work. A note that we don't migrate any code using this tool. There are no good options for TFVC, Team Foundation Version Control, the original TFS version control system. There is the TFS integration tools, which is not supported. There's a number of other tools out there as well. I would recommend using Git TFS tool to migrate your TFVC code into Git repos. That's what I would recommend. Get out of TFVC, move into Git. Git is really easy to migrate. You just clone the repo from the source location and push it to the target location. That it just works out of the box. I did mention earlier that there's while we are processing work items, if the Git repo has been moved across first, then the tool will fix up the Git commit links on the fly. So in Azure DevOps and TFS, you can link from a Git commit to a work item by tagging it. So hash 121 will link work item 121, and you can link to pull requests. So your pull request links will disappear because we can't migrate pull requests, but your Git commit links will be fixed on the work item side. So it will not be fixed in the comment of the commit, because it's a totally different exercise to go do that. But when the work item is created and the links are added, it will go and see if it can find the Git repo in the new location. If it can find the Git repo in the new location, it will fix your link so that it points to the right commit. And note that there is a way in the tool to map your Git repos if you've renamed them. If they're the same name, then that's super easy. You don't need to do any mapping, and it will just find it. You can run this after using the fix git commit obsolete processor, so you can run it on its own, but it's better to run it as part of the whole thing. Builds and releases don't get migrated automatically. You will need to export and import each of your builds, each of your releases, and then all of the secrets that are part of that will need to be re-added. That's just an exercise in going through them all and doing that. There's not a good way to do that. If you are open to working on that, you could very easily build a processor that could do that. We just haven't had the occasion to do that yet. A note on contributing: we are happy to take any contributions that you have as long as they're relevant for everybody rather than just for your organization. There is no official support for the Azure DevOps migration tools apart from community support, because this is an open source project. I am happy to help folks out if they're having trouble. If you have significant trouble, then that may be something that's more related to a consulting engagement rather than just me pointing out where the configuration needs to be customized. Ultimately, if it's going to take me an hour to solve the problem, then I'm good. I'll maybe help you out. If it's going to take 3 days to solve the problem, then we might need to have a conversation. And there are other contributors to the project who are also happy to help. There are many contributors. We've had over 40 contributors. Go look up any contributor you want, have them help you out. We're going to add some more recommendations here so that you've got somewhere to start. And I'm definitely I've got 2 more folks that are going to end up on that list very, very quickly. So let me jump into how you use and interact with the tool. The first thing I recommend, I do a lot of migrations between Azure DevOps and Azure DevOps. That's mainly for customers that have sold part of their organization, or they want to merge many team projects into one project, or they want to split a project into more than one project. That works as well. So the easiest way to do that is to run the tool on a machine that has access to both environments you want to migrate to. So I don't generally recommend running it on your local machine, mainly because your local machine gets turned off at the end of the day and you want to go home, and migrations might take a lot longer than that. So I recommend, especially if all of your target and source environments are in Azure, that you create in Azure a dev test lab. And the reason I suggest a dev test lab is because it can automatically turn the machines off and on as needed. So I'm just going to create a new dev test lab. So I'm going to create that. So I'm going to leave auto shutdown enabled. You want to use the location of your hopefully both your source and the target are in the same location. If not, I recommend creating this in the same data center as your target environment, because we're going to be doing a lot more communicating with the target environment than we are with the source environment, because we just load all the work items and then run against the target. So in order to see where that is, if you open up your organization, go to organization settings, and you will see on the overview page the region, and this one is in West Europe. So I'm going to create that in West Europe, which is my default because that's where I am right now, and I'm going to create that. Okay, once your Azure DevOps lab has been created, you need to create a machine inside that, a virtual machine. I'm going to add a virtual machine. I've had a lot of trouble with the Windows 10 versions of, if I type in, I've had a lot of problems with the on Windows 10 ones. They basically had not been starting. I don't know if that's fixed, so I'm not going to do that just now. So I'm just going to pick Visual Studio 2019 Enterprise on Windows Server 2019. So I'm not calling it that. Migration. And I'm just going to put in a password. Well, I can do that. Generate and fill. I will probably have to go look for that later, so let me copy that into Notepad so I don't have to show you all of my passwords. There we go. You are quite welcome to steal that because I will have deleted this machine at the end of the video. So not now. Okay. So make sure that's the right thing. And I'm not going to use the standard A3 because it is tiny. I'm going to map that to, I want at least 4 processors. There's 4 processors at 16 gig of RAM. So a D4SV3. I have the auto off set to true so that at the end of every day, like maybe 7 o'clock every day, the machine turns off and shuts down. When I do the actual migration, I'll turn that off and then I'll go turn it back on again after the migration is completed. So I'm going to use premium SSDs as well. So this would be an expensive machine if it was running for a long period of time. And I'm not going to set up any of this because sometimes it doesn't work so well. And I'm going to create that machine. Okay, so once your machine has been created and it's running, we just need to log into it. So let me do that. There's my password that we set up. Yes, we're good with that. Okay, so now that we are into the machine, and I will still give it a few seconds before I try and start clicking stuff for it to get organized. No, we do not want it to be discoverable. Thank you very much. It will start a bunch of default stuff that I'm not really that interested in. Let me get rid of that. There we go. Okay. So I have Visual Studio. I have all of the bits I need installed. Unfortunately, I have to use IE because it is server. So the first thing I want to do is I need to install the tool from Chocolatey. Whatever's. Oh, yep. Let me make it bigger. I understand. So first thing I'm going to do is install Chocolatey. This is very easy to do. Copy the script, open a PowerShell in admin mode. Oh, well, that's pasting my password. We've got some. Oh, there we go. Yes, allow access. Now I've got it, and that will install Chocolatey on my machine. Chocolatey is a package manager, so it's basically going to handle the install and uninstall of the tools. So that's it all set up. So if I validate that it's all working, there we go, it's all working. Okay, So now if I go back to the first page. So in order to install our tools, the Azure DevOps migration tools, we just need to type this. Yes, always allow access. Into the command line. And that will go and download the bits needed to install it, including any dependencies, which there shouldn't actually be any dependencies, which is pretty good because we're running on a machine with Visual Studio installed. There we go, it's all been installed. So now you will find in your C drive, there's a tools folder. In that tools folder, there's a VSTS sync migration folder. So if I go in there, you'll see there's loads of files, but the main one is the migration.exe. So we're going to call migration.exe in order to set this all up. So let me kill IE because we don't need IE anymore. And let me show you what's going on, and then we'll move some stuff to a folder that makes it easier for us to see. So tools, migration, and there's a lot of stuff in there. The first thing we need to do is create a template migration file. So if you run there we go. Oh, let's go one back. Migration.exe, and we type init. It will create a simple work item tracking based file. So if I go up here, I might need to refresh. Configuration here. So let's open a new folder and pop that just onto the temporary storage. There we go. View file and extensions. There we go. So we have our JSON file there. Now this file is just work items. So if I just do tap work items, there we go. And we can take a look at the config file and see what is what. So this is the first time Visual Studio has been started on this machine, so it may take a minute or so. I guess while we're waiting, I can open with Notepad and we can take a look while it's loading. So what I've done is I've created a default file. I'm going to go through some of the options in the file so that you can see what is in here. Not now, maybe later. I like the dark theme. Okay. So the first thing is it has a version. This matches the version of the tool, at least the first 2 digits of the version. And its purpose is to make sure we don't accidentally run an old config against a new version of the tool. So if there's a new version of the tool and it changes a major version, check for any differences and maybe update this. The tool will not run if you're using an older version of the config file, but it might just be a case of changing that 3 for a 4 and then everything's good. Telemetry trace is by default set to false. Really don't turn this on. This can be used for some debug scenarios. It will push all of the telemetry out to application insights. So you don't want to do that. By default, there's a base set of metrics are sent to App Insights. So it'll say how many work items have been processed, how long they're taking, exceptions, those kind of things are passed to App Insights. If you enable the trace, then every thing that you see going past on the command line screen will also be sent to App Insights. So you don't want to do that unless you're working with one of the consultants who has access to App Insights and you want to have a discussion around some of the telemetry, or try something, push some things out. This was a workaround for the Azure DevOps team breaking the APIs. Should by default be set to false. We just haven't removed it yet. And then the two really important things are the source and the target. So source and target both are the same format. You've got the collection. So what is the URL of the collection that you're connecting to? So that could be the TFS connection URL or the Azure DevOps connection URL. The name of the project inside of that goes under name. And the reflected work item ID field name is the name of the field that you've added to that project into the process where we're going to store the reflected work item ID. Now, if it's TFS, you get to set the whole thing. If it's Azure DevOps, when you create a new field, you only get to set this bit on the end. And it used to be, if you've added this to an older process, it will be process name dot. But if you go add one just now to Azure DevOps, it will be custom dot. I don't know why they changed it or how that's meant to be documented, but it just is. You can use, there is a tool to export processes that you can use, even the inherited processes. You can export that and then go look at what the field's been called. But generally, it's one of those two things. It's either whatever you've set it as, if you're in TFS. If you have an XML process in Azure DevOps, then it will be the same. If you have an inherited process and it's an old process, then it might be called my process name dot reflected work item ID. If not, if it's newer, it's just custom. Oh, custom. So you may just need, there's only 3 possibilities. So you could just do trial and error. The tool will check to make sure that what you've typed in there is valid. So that's pretty good. The field maps is empty. You don't need to add any field maps. By default, the tool will map same field name to same field name, or same field ref to same field ref. If you want to change any of the data on the fly on the way across, then you would need to set up field maps. But this is just the easy setup. Work item type definition now does not need to contain anything. It can be empty. But if you have, for example, in the source, if you're using user story, and in the target you're using product backlog item, then you would fill those differences out in here. Otherwise, it will just process all the existing ones. And I mentioned before that the Git repo mapping. So if you need to map Git repo names from old name to new name, a new location, then that would be in here as well. Again, in this case, it is null. So then we come to the processors. There are 2 processors. Let's go to the color-coded version. Now we get to the processors, and there are 2 processors set up here for us to see. The first one is the node structure migration config. This will migrate your areas and iteration paths across. You can set base paths if you want to filter that, but please note that if you try and save a work item when you're doing the work item migration to an area path that does not exist, there will be an error generated and the thing will bomb out. The area paths need to exist. So what I normally do is just set this to empty. You don't need to have any base paths at all, and it will just migrate all of your work items if there are no paths, all of your area and iteration paths if there are no base paths present. There is one feature on here, and it actually needs to be consistent across all of the processors that you run if you're going to use it, and that's prefix project to nodes, which means that it is going to, if you had Team Project 1 and you were migrating it into Team Project 2, and you wanted Team Project 2 to have an area path of Team Project 1 with all of the Team Project 1 area paths underneath it, then it would do that. This is a feature for if you're merging team projects. So if I have team project 1, 2, 3, and 4, they're all merging into team project 5. Team project 5 will have root area paths of team project 1, 2, 3, and 4. Under that, all of the work items, all the data, so that you're not just merging it together into a big mess, and you can take some action afterwards to clean it up and figure out whether there's dupes and all that kind of thing. Generally, you want this set to off unless you're doing a team project merge, and even then you need to make that choice. So this one needs node structures, needs to be run first in order to have that work. You've then got a work item migration config. The work item migration config sets up the migration for the work items. Processors are set to false by default, so nothing will happen if you run it. I generally run them one at a time to make sure everything's good, so you can set that enabled to true. And then there's a number of things that you might want to have. So first off, you've got the prefix project to nodes, again set to false. It must be consistent across the project. You've also got the update created date and update created by. In most cases, this should be set to true, which is why that's the default. If you're having a problem because you have a particular version of TFS that does not allow you to edit the created date or created by, you can turn these to false. Update source reflected ID, it should be set to false. It's set to true. I'll need to go fix that. The default should be false. This will actually also go and edit the source work item with the reflected work item ID of the new location. We're doing away with this feature because there's no point in editing the source if there's another way to do it, and I've figured out another way to do it. If you're replaying revisions, you do not need build field table. So if you're just doing a tip migration, then you want to set this to true, and it will build a table of all the existing fields in the source work item and save it into the comments of the new work item so that you can at least go and search for any old data that might not have been migrated across into fields. And then there's a signature which you can set to true or false. We'll probably get rid of this, but it's set to false just now. So that brings us to the replay revisions. Replay revisions will either replay each of the changes made to a work item if it's set to true, or it will just take the latest tip of the work item if set to false. If you're doing a sync, i.e. there's been changes made since the last revision change, it actually filters the list based on the exact date time of the save. So you'll have maybe 10 revisions, and the first thing it does is it looks at the target work item and takes out all of the identical updated dates and times out of the list, and then picks the top one if replay revisions is set to false, and replays them if it's set to true. So that's that's how that part works. And the way it knows which work items to load is you have a query bit. Generally, you can't have more than 20,000 work items as the result of a query, so you may need to stage this if you have more than 20,000 work items. And you never want to migrate test suites and plants. There may be other work item types that you don't want to migrate, so you can add them to that not in list. And what I generally do is I focus the initial migration on the open work items, so the ones where close date is not set to anything. And then I will rerun it again with the opposite being true, with close date populated to fill out all the closed items. That way people can move over and start working in the new system, and everything's hunky-dory. There's the order bit from the query. I usually do change date so that it goes from latest change date to oldest. So the most recently touched work items are updated first, and then it gets into the past where it's less likely to cause a problem. And then while it's migrating each work item, there are a number of features. One is the link migrator, which by default should be true. This will attempt to add all of the existing links. So it's going to add all of the different link types apart from pull request links, because we can't migrate pull requests. This will migrate all of the attachments. You'll need to pass it a temporary folder for the working path where it's going to download and upload the attachments. The default should suffice on 99% of systems. It will clean up itself afterwards. There may be some things left over when it can't delete folders because files are still in use, but it will generally clean up after itself. And then the fix HTML attachment links is for in HTML fields you can paste an image. That image has an absolute path to the file, and that will not work in the new system when the old system goes offline. Unfortunately, that's not working just now. We have some authentication issues with that, but what it's supposed to do is basically download each of the attachments, add it as an attachment to the work item, so you'll have extra attachments, and then insert fix the links for you. Again, it doesn't work just now. We've got authentication issues with that communication. We'll get it fixed at some point. There's a number of people who are looking at that. You occasionally get errors just communicating to Azure DevOps. If you're migrating 30,000 work items with 100 revisions each and a bunch of attachments and links, you're going to be hitting the Azure DevOps APIs pretty heavily. You're probably going to get slowed down, and occasionally that system will glitch. It's on the internet. It could be for any reason between your environments. So there's a automatic retry, and it will wait. If it gets a 503, which is a server unavailable exception, it will wait for 1 second, then retry, then wait for 2 seconds, and retry all the way up to 5 seconds, and then retry. And if it fails after the 5th attempt, the tool will stop. Cool, so that's what it is. I don't recommend making that number that much higher, but if you set it to 15, the last one will be waiting 15 seconds and then retrying as well. This is a really important one. Filter work items that already exist in the target. There is a mutually exclusive nature here that I need to mention. So what it will do is it will, using the same query bit, okay, it's going to load the source work items, load the target work items, and remove any target work items from the source list that already exist. So if you're trying to sync things that have been changed that are newer, that will not work, because it will filter them all out because they already exist. By default, you want this set to true, because if you're migrating 30,000 work items and it glitches after 5,000, you don't want to have to load and skip over each of those 5,000 work items. So that will filter those out. So I recommend getting a full run with this enabled, and then using a date-based query. So see, you've got close date. I would do a full migration, and then do need to spell it right. Change date, and have that set to greater than date of migration. So let's say it was 2019 10/16, because we started the migration yesterday. It's finished, and now I want to rerun anything that was changed after we started the migration. And you would need to start with the date of the migration, because you can't put times in there. And that will work super awesome, and then it will just go and pull the 300 work items that were changed yesterday and today and re-update them. But you would need to change this to false so that you can migrate, and it will skip anything that doesn't need any changes, but it will need to do a bunch of stuff around that, which is why you want this generally set to true. Okay, that was a brief overview of the Azure DevOps migration tools. Let me know if you have any issues on GitHub. Create an issue on GitHub and somebody will help you out.